So do you find it frustrating that now the smallest thing automatically triggers your anxiety? You normally are experiencing things just fine, but all of a sudden now that you're experiencing anxiety, you're feeling these physical symptoms, you're getting these intrusive thoughts, you're feeling these feelings of unreality, the smallest thing will trigger you. Maybe it's a commercial, maybe it's just a conversation, maybe it's just a memory. And your first instinct is, how do I make these triggers go away? And what are my triggers so I can avoid them? In this video, I want to talk to you about how that's a surefire way to become agoraphobic, meaning you don't leave your house. I know because I've tried it. And really to come out of this, to avoid triggers, to fix triggers once and for all, you just need to do a few things correctly. So pay attention. So my anxiety started from a panic attack. And if you know my story, I had never really experienced anxiety, not like that. I never even really had a panic attack. I actually thought I was gonna die when I was experiencing a panic attack. And so what happened was I had a panic attack, it started, and then it ended. And what happened was after that panic attack, I just became kind of concerned about getting another one. I didn't know what that was. It was frightening. It did not feel good. And I was really concerned about getting another panic attack. Now, ironically, because of that fear, I actually did end up getting more panic attacks. And so what happened was I ended up getting more panic attacks until I started experiencing anxiety 24/7. I became chronic. So rather than just having a panic attack that went up and went down, even after I had that panic attack, I was still experiencing anxiety. And the reason why I was experiencing that was really this idea of sensitization. And it's one of the most important things to understand when struggling with anxiety, and unfortunately, not a lot of people know about this. And so the reason why I'm mentioning this is because sensitization has a lot to do with why you're getting triggered by mundane things. So sensitization works this way. Essentially what happens is your body kind of responds to perceived threats. Perceived meaning it's whatever kind of scares you. And typically we've kind of evolved as mammals in like the African savanna, meaning most of our threats were predatory. Tigers, lions, snakes, bears, things out to come get us. So there's typically two responses. One is that you either fight the threat or you run away. Now here's the interesting thing. Your nervous system kind of keeps account of all this. What I mean by this is that let's say you went into a situation where you saw a tiger. Now, if you go to that same situation, your body will actually automatically gear up for the fight or flight response. The idea is that if your nervous system has seen a threat that was convincing that it was a life or death situation, if you're in a similar situation, it's gonna refire. It's gonna say, well, if I saw a tiger once, the chance of me seeing a tiger again is very likely, so I'm just gonna get ready. I'm gonna prepare Shaan. Now, what happens is that kind of environment begins to generalize. So what happens is that it's not just one environment where your nervous system gears up, it's another environment that's very similar to the first environment. So the idea is that if you've been in one environment with a threat, well, maybe a similar environment means there's another threat that's just around the corner. And so what happens is anxiety that becomes isolated, starts off as being isolated, starts generalizing. Hence the term generalized anxiety disorder. This is why when you see individuals that, let's say, have a panic attack in the car, they stop driving because all of a sudden, the next time they go in the car, they get a panic attack. But then what they start noticing is that enclosed spaces start giving them a panic attack. Now they can't even fly. And now they stop even going to elevators, or small rooms get them claustrophobic. And so what's happened was anxiety, that panic attack happened in the car, and that taught your nervous system that there's a fight or flight response, there's a threat. In any situation where you feel enclosed, where you feel trapped, all of a sudden your nervous system wants to protect you. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because that's exactly what happens when you experience triggers. Any small thing that reminds you of your panic attack or your anxiety or the fact that you can't get out of this or the fact that this has been an insolvable problem for so long, anything like that, your nervous system is going to respond in a very exaggerated manner. The reason why is because it's sensitized. This is why you notice that individuals that aren't really struggling with anxiety, they don't get triggered the same way. Now, they would get triggered in like life or death situations. If I walked down in the street and a truck was coming at me, my fight or flight response would respond. But you will be experiencing those symptoms even just from a memory, just from reading a forum, just from Google searching a symptom. And all of a sudden you feel, even just the word anxiety used to trigger me. And so it's really important to understand that a lot of the reasons why you're feeling these triggers is because of sensitization. Okay, so you're getting triggered because you're sensitized. Okay, but now your question is, okay, well, how do I know what my triggers are? A lot of people will say, well, my trigger is coffee, my trigger is alcohol, my trigger is, waking up early in the morning, my trigger is stress from work. And really what they're saying is, I want to know my trigger so I can avoid it. Now, remember, anxiety kind of works in a way where it's based on heuristics. And what I mean by that is that it generalizes. If it finds similar situations that are completely irrelevant, if they're similar in just certain ways, it will refire. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because when you're experiencing anxiety, when you're experiencing this trigger, you want to know what it is so that you can avoid it. But here's the truth. What ends up happening a lot of times, actually this always happens, is that when people end up avoiding every single trigger, their triggers just generalize. So it turns from one thing to two things, from two things to four things, from four things to eight things. And then what ends up happening is that everything triggers them and they stop even leaving their house. This is what agoraphobia is. Agoraphobia is just your avoidance behavior has gotten so strong that even just leaving the house will give you a panic attack. They're always doing something to avoid the anxiety until they become a prisoner in their own house. They can't even leave. And people do this for years. And so what happens a lot of times is that you'll read forums and you'll find people struggling longer than you, and you'll see these people that are trapped in their house, and it will absolutely scare you. You'll think, well, is that gonna be me? Am I never gonna be able to leave the house? No. What's really happening is that they're actually just avoiding their triggers and they've taken it too far. So what do? Well, recognize no matter what your trigger is to a certain degree, it doesn't matter. Because the reason why you want to know what your triggers are is because you want it to go away. But avoiding triggers doesn't work. This isn't an intuitive idea. I get where this logic comes from, right? Like, think about it. Let's say I have kind of a stove and the stove is hot. If I put my hand on the stove and I burn my hand, I'll naturally retract it, right? Like, the stove is hot, I don't want to get burned, so I pull back. That's exactly how you're responding with your anxiety. And intuitively that makes sense, right? I felt something, I got triggered, I don't want to feel that again, so I avoid the trigger. But remember this idea of sensitization. Remember this idea of generalization. It's not about you retracting. The second you retract, what your nervous system is doing is it's recognizing that anything that's hot will trigger it. Now just being out in the sun is going to trigger it. So anxiety works in a very counterintuitive way. Avoiding anxiety doesn't work. It works for everything else. It works for a lot of other things in life, but it doesn't work for anxiety. So avoiding triggers doesn't work. So what does work? Well, recognize that it doesn't really matter what your triggers are now, right? The idea is that when you experience a trigger, the key is, how do you respond? And again, this is kind of counterintuitive, right? Because if you've already been triggered, who cares how you respond? Whether you respond in panic or you accept it and allow it, what's the difference? The trigger's already happened. It means everything. What the trigger is actually happening, what's really happening is that when you're experiencing the trigger, the way you respond is that you're teaching your nervous system, hey, nervous system, this is a real threat. You activate it at the right time. So when people end up responding in panic, it teaches the nervous system, oh, okay, so that was something, that was a life or death situation. Shaan is reacting clearly in fear, so we clearly protected him. Now imagine a similar situation where, let's say I felt a trigger and my body was sensitized and I started experiencing physical symptoms because of the trigger, scary intrusive thoughts, why is this me? Why is this happening? Oh God, is this gonna happen to me? My mind starts racing, but instead, this time I just allow it. I don't do anything, I don't try to fix it, I just allow the trigger to come and I don't respond in fear. I can be scared, but I don't respond in fear. I just allow the trigger to be there and I keep going. This person actually gets to freedom. This person is on their way to overcoming anxiety. Because what this person is telling their nervous system is, hey, you just fired in a situation that was inappropriate. You shouldn't have fired. This was not a life or death situation. Look at how Shaan responded. He didn't respond in fear and panic. He just allowed it and kept going. maybe what the trigger is not actually a real life or death situation. So if you really want to know more, okay, how do I get out of this situation? How do I understand more about this anxiety and these triggers so that I can focus on overcoming? I'll put a link down below. This is a link to essentially a book I've written out. It's absolutely free. It really tells you step by step how to really get out of this. It goes way more in detail than this video. And I've really laid it out for you. I've written it out so that you can read it multiple times and that you can get to full freedom. Utilize these steps in every situation where you're triggered. That way, you know how to respond and you can actually come out of this once and for all. Now, look, I've helped clients around the world overcome this. Like around the world, fully get back to living, go back to their old selves with being essentially carefree and just going back to living. And one of the things I teach all my clients is kind of this mind shift, like this mindset shift. And it really helps with overcoming anxiety. And here's the mindset. It doesn't matter how hard or intense the trigger is. It doesn't matter what triggers you. Focus on becoming more process-oriented, not outcome-dependent. Here's what I mean. Don't measure your anxiety based on what's triggering you, how hard the trigger is hitting you, how many triggers you have. That's irrelevant. Be process-oriented, meaning how are you responding to these triggers? Doesn't matter if you got 1 trigger, 10 triggers. How do you respond? Even if you have 100 triggers, doesn't matter. How are you responding? Your response determines recovery. So one of the first things I tell my clients is forget this idea of, oh, Shaan, I'm getting more triggers. Does that mean I'm doing well or bad or good? Doesn't matter. The idea is, well, how are you responding? If you're responding correctly, you're teaching your nervous system. So recovery is inevitable. Eventually, your nervous system is going to say, look, we keep firing at times that are just completely inappropriate. And so we need to conserve this energy anyway. So we might as well use it in a situation where it is actually life or death. And so what happens is the anxiety begins to lift. You start getting desensitized. Now, as you get desensitized, you start experiencing less physical symptoms. You get less intrusive thoughts. You stop getting these feelings of unreality. You let go of these emotions. These emotions start dwindling away and you kind of start coming back to your old self. This is how exactly recovery looks like. And look, I get it. Just telling you these few things, I know how difficult it is. I had to go through the exact same thing myself. I know exactly what you're going through. And what I have found is that the best way to get out of this is just literally taking people by the hand and just taking them to recovery. I'm really glad you guys like these videos. I make these videos for you guys, but I've honestly found the best way to recovery is just taking people by the hand and getting them out. And so why don't we just do this together? If you're dealing with triggers, why don't we just walk through them together? I will guide you. I'll take you by the hand and I will just take you to recovery myself. We'll face these triggers together. We'll get your nervous system to desensitize together. So if that's you, there's a link to my mentorship program. In this mentorship program, I have a small group of individuals that I'm personally taking to recovery. I'm not interested in them just feeling a little bit better and coping. My main focus is if I'm going to be working with somebody, they need to get back to full recovery, going back to living exactly their free lives the way they were before. So if that's you, hit the link down below. When you hit the link, you have to watch just a short video. After that video, there's an application page. You fill out that application. My team and I, myself, will review that application, see if you're a good fit. And if so, we'll schedule a consultation with you. We'll look at your biggest strengths. We'll look at your biggest roadblocks, your biggest challenges. And if we can honestly help, we'll see if we can invite you to the mentorship and I will personally take you under my wing and we'll get you to recovery ourselves. So if that's you, hit the link down below. I'll see you inside.